morning, everyone. So nice to see your faces and all of you joining us with us today. I'm Kimberly Schumacher. I'm the Vice President of Partnerships and Services at CJP, and it's a true pleasure to be with you all today and to kick off this session. I have the pleasure of knowing so many of you, but not all of you. I write a bi-weekly email to our partner leadership that comes out from myself as well as Sarah Abramson, our Senior Vice President. And it's filled with resources and suggestions, many of which come from you for resources that would be helpful as you lead and do this important work. If you don't receive those informations and would love to, please let me know. We are for sure stronger together. We knew that before COVID, and for sure we know this now. Many of you are juggling a lot, and I do want to say my heart's heavy this morning. We recently learned that some of our leaders that were going to join us this morning cannot because of COVID in their own families. So our hearts and thoughts are with them. And of course, we know that everyone has been impacted by COVID one way or another. If we could wish it away, of course we all would. One silver lining that we have seen that is really beautiful has been the spirit of collaboration among all of you as leaders, and a real vulnerability of sharing what's worked well, what are you struggling with. And I want to thank you and acknowledge that and ask that you carry that spirit with you today as we do this LEAP session. LEAP is all based on the principle of leveraging across each other, your knowledge, your experience, and your wisdom. So please bring that today. We launched LEAP, thanks to my colleague Marnie Allen last year, was even more successful than we imagined. And we're really thrilled to kick off this year's session today. Our theme for the year will be business planning, scenario, and supports during the time of COVID. Our most popular session last year was the session that our board leader, Ed Shapiro, kicked off on strategic alliances and mergers. And so our next session that will happen right after the high holidays will be a continuation on those themes as well. So more information to come on that one. Little bit of ground rules today. We have the typical ones, of course. We're going to have the chat room function is happening. Please feel free to type in anytime, including now. If you have any specific questions or issues that you'd like to make sure our presenters cover, please type it in. We'll make sure that we either cover it during our 90 minutes together, or we will capture it so that we can get back to you on an individual basis as well. So use the chat room. It is being supported by my colleagues, Hannah Underwood and Joanna Feldman. They can help you with any technical issues as well. Few other ground rules above the normal is I would encourage you to bring your full selves to this. Many of you have volunteer leadership roles as well as professional leadership roles in the Jewish community, in the broader community. You may sit on multiple boards. Please bring all of your experience to bear. We can learn a lot from each other, and I do thank you in advance for that. It's okay to be vulnerable. These sessions are often the best when people share what they're struggling with, and we can best help you that way. So thank you for that. And I would ask one more ground rule is to, or guiding principle, if I could, is to keep in mind you can continue this conversation after the Zoom. If you hear a colleague make an interesting comment or suggestion or struggling with something that you are as well, please continue the conversation and continue the dialogue and learning with and from each other. I am enormously grateful for the leadership that is joining us today. Our board leadership, Lorraine Sperling and Neil Wallach, will be facilitating some sessions with additional phenomenal leadership, which they will introduce. Thank you, thank you. We're going to have our Mark Baker, our president and CEO, is going to share a few words and then kick off our keynote and our panelists. We're going to come back together very briefly at the end for a wrap up and also for a virtual feedback session that will be live so we can hear from you on what worked well and what we should tweak for next time. So I want to thank you all for that. And thank you for being with us, sharing your thoughts and learning with and from us all today. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mark.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. Kimberly, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Mark.
Great. Boker Tov, everyone. It's so great to see all of you here. I'm grateful that you took the time to be here this morning. More importantly, I'm grateful for your leadership always, and in particular over these past many months. One of the things that has inspired me every single day during this incredibly challenging time has been seeing our professional and lay leaders literally holding their organizations and our community on your shoulders. We would not be where we are today, and we will not get to where we all aspire to go without you. So thank you so much. I just want to say a quick word of Torah, because I couldn't resist when Kimberly mentioned the word vulnerability. You know, one of the things that makes me most proud of this community and of this whole concept of LEAP is the notion that a community that is striving for excellence and constant improvement is one that is always learning. And in order to learn, we have to be willing to reflect and to do the hard work of making ourselves vulnerable and asking ourselves, you know, what is the gap between where we are and where we know we want to go? We're in the month of Elul right now. And sometimes we forget this month because we're charging toward the end of the summer, getting ready for the Jewish high holidays. Sometimes we get to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and we're like, oh my God, I'm not ready. You know, and we're supposed to do all this work of change and self-improvement. But the reality is those are just one day. And I think, you know, there's an Elul this month is really the month where we get to really crank up the work of reflection and self-improvement and asking ourselves, well, we still have time, so to speak. You know, how do we want to change and improve and get better so we're ready when the time comes? And I think in so many ways, leadership learning individually and organizationally and collectively is about not waiting for the crisis, not waiting for the moment, but investing the time like we are this morning to learn and reflect and grow so we're ready. Every day we step into that boardroom and when the moment calls. Just a few words about LEAP and about CJP and about this moment. As Kimberly said, we launched LEAP last year really for two reasons. One is to leverage the expertise of the incredible people and volunteers across this community. And we heard time and time again, I've got more to give, I've got more to give. And we heard from others, I've got more to learn, I've got more to learn. But also, really, LEAP is a platform for partners, for knowledge, for insights, for collective learning that leads to collective action. And I think it's been a really powerful model so far, and I'm excited to see where it's going to go from here. You know, what a 4 or 5 months it's been. If there was ever a question in any of our minds about whether we and our organizations need to adapt and change to respond to a changing world, these last 4 months have shown us we've got no choice. Like, we need to change, we need to adapt, we need to evolve, we need to innovate because things are changing faster than we ever imagined, and things are as challenging as we ever thought they would be. If there was ever a question about whether any of us or our organizations could go it alone right now in this challenging, complex, fast-moving world, I think these fast 4 months have shown us we need to be in this together, we need one another, and we will be stronger and more resilient when 1 + 1 = 3. And CJP itself right now is striving to adapt and to evolve and to really wrestle with how we can provide the most value to this community and how we can be a trusted partner to all of you and to all of our organizations to help to fuel the kind of innovation and adaptation that we're talking about here this morning, and to try to fuel the kind of collaboration and collective impact that our community needs so desperately right now. And we will continue to evolve how we do that, both through mobilizing and inspiring the extraordinary generosity and philanthropy in this community and investing those sacred dollars as strategically as we can, but also through bringing together and connecting and mobilizing the incredible people, like all of you on this call this morning, whose passion and experience and skills really make this community the extraordinary place that it is. And how appropriate then that our first LEAP session of this year is actually about governance. Because for me, when I think about what a board is, and I think one way to think about a board is as a platform for the creativity and the collective impact of a passionate, talented group of volunteers who bring unique skills to bear on a shared purpose of advancing a mission and vision and critical work of organizations that they care about. That's what you're doing every single time you step into that boardroom, whether it's in person or right now more likely virtual. I just want to say I love the title of this session, Engage Your Board to Further Your Mission. I'm sure most of you didn't pay close attention to those words, but I wanted to just unpack them for a second with you because I was thinking about most of the board trainings I've been in throughout my career, and many times board trainings aim at like the minimum viable product. Most of the board trainings that I've been in, they could be titled How to Simply Minimize Dysfunction on Your Board. It would be like, how do you manage this group of people to make it through? And they focus on not micromanaging and knowing the boundaries between board and professional roles, and of course, fiduciary responsibilities. And I don't mean to minimize these. These are incredibly critical, but they're just a foundation for what is the powerful, creative, generative work that a board should do. After I finished all those trainings, it's like, well, once you minimize dysfunction, what do we do next? And that's why I love engage your board to further your mission. It is a forward moving concept. It's not about managing your board. It's about engaging and actualizing the potential of your board. It's not about doing the day-to-day work. It's about furthering your mission and advancing your vision and together moving forward to an aspired future and to actualizing the potential of the organizations we care so much about. That's what this morning is about. That's what you all are doing every day in your boardrooms. And that's why our community is so strong and will continue to get stronger thanks to all of you and your leadership. I'm excited about our panelists and presenters today. Thank you for being here. We look forward to learning from your wisdom and experience. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague and partner in this work, Marnie Allen. Marnie's been playing a critical role at CJP in helping us to actualize the potential of the great people, great volunteers, great leaders, both at CJP and across this community. Marnie, I'm grateful to your work and look forward to you kicking off this morning's session. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you, Mark. What a perfect frame up, and thank you, Kimberly, and all of you for joining us. It's really exciting to see so many familiar faces and community members who have been part of our LEAP sessions over the past year and people who are coming to this forum for the first time. It is my real pleasure this morning to jump into conversation with two leaders who have been impactful on boards here in the greater Boston community, nationally, in the Jewish community, outside the Jewish community. And so I'm going to jump right in because I'm sure you're all eager to hear their wisdom. I will just remind you, as Kimberly said, please feel free to put questions into the chat as we go. I'll try to keep an eye on them. I have a few questions to kick us off, and then we really want to hear from you and be responsive to what's on your mind. So it is my pleasure this morning to introduce Neil Wallach and Lorraine Sperling to join me in conversation. Neil was the former board chair at CJP. He's now an emeritus director with us. He's also on the board of Jewish Federations of North America and the board and the executive committee at JDC. Lorraine Sperling is managing trustee at the Sperling Family Charitable Foundation. She is also a CJP board member and chair of our Commission on Strategic Priorities. And one of the things I found most exciting about learning from Lorraine is she also is the vice chair of the Duke University Board of Trustees. And so Neil and Lorraine, thank you both for joining us. As Mark said, the board, there's important work to get good board members involved with you. But there's also really critical work after you've recruited those directors to engage people and get the most out of the potential that we've worked so hard to bring into the room. So I'd like to start off our conversation there and ask if each of you could share a reflection, a story about a time when you have really been able to partner with your fellow board leaders and think about how to get the most out of the individuals who are in the room.
Great. Marnie, thanks. First of all, great to see everyone. It's so many friends on this call, so hope everyone's having a good summer. So Marnie, I'll take a first shot at that. And the story I'd like to tell is probably apropos for Lorraine as well, in that the stories that we're talking about are about specific instances that we've experienced, but that can be generalized to lessons learned for lots of different experiences. So no one expected COVID, but obviously what we do in advance of that helps with that. My own experience that I want to share is that my first meeting as chair of CJP was not surprising with Barry Schrage, the former president of CJP, where we went to Johnny's and he told me at this first meeting that he would be moving on to his next gig sometime soon. So that kind of changed the agenda of my tenure as chair and the board's approach to things. And by the way, he described going to a university setting and teaching what he has learned to the next generation. So that story ends super well, obviously. So those of you who know me know that I like to break things into three buckets all the time. This was another one of those cases. And what we realized is that we needed to have great buy-in and support of the board to take on this process of change of leadership. And the three buckets that we broke it down into was having good tactical processes, good people as part of those processes, and then good communications. And communications, may be part of processes, but totally should be looked at as a separate and distinct model. And for approaching these processes, these people and communications approaches, it was critical that we reached out to the board. Some of you are here. There were conversations with various members of our board who they represent different constituencies, our partner organizations, our donors, our volunteers and all. And each of them have their own sets of experiences and views on the future that it's important to share, but also views on the past. So in terms of processes, we learned that we needed to have more than one process. We had a Barry transition team, transitioning him towards the exit. We had a search committee. We had a tactical set of conversations with each of the standing committees that report to the board. And we had a transition committee that we formed to bring Mark in. Those are lessons we learned from members of our board. In terms of good people, obviously the search committee was key. Having good leadership there was a very good thing to have. Obviously, Shira Goodman, who's on this call, was one of the co-chairs with Erin Ain, someone who was on the board, someone who wasn't on the board, another lesson learned from members of our board. Constant interactions with the board throughout, and the transitions committees that I've mentioned in the past were also made up of both board members and non-board members. So you could get this broad swath. And then finally, communications, the communications bucket. One of our board members had been a leader in the head rabbi search for TI, Temple Israel, and had taught us the importance of ongoing and critical communications, online, social media, in person, and so on. Frequent, anticipatory, and inclusive. These were lessons that we learned from the board members. And so the whole process of going from Barry's iconic leadership to what is becoming, well, hopefully will be Mark's iconic leadership over many, many years, was engaging, convening, and collaborating with the board throughout and making them part of that process. So each and every one of them, which takes forward planning and relationships with them all along the way. Couldn't have done it without the board.
Great. Thanks, Neil. I have a couple follow-up questions, but before we jump in, I'd love to invite Lorraine to share an experience from your board time.
Thanks, Marnie. And as a board member, I can attest to the fact that I felt very much a part of the process, Neil, and I'm very pleased with the results. So thank you for running such an amazing process. When I joined the Duke board in 2010, the board was really quite diverse across a variety of spectrums, gender, race, area of expertise, age. And 4 years into my tenure, I was asked to go on to the Committee of Trusteeship, which has since been folded into the Governance Committee. The committee was charged with bringing new trustees, candidates to the board for approval. And at one of my first meetings, concern was really expressed that a number of women would be cycling off of the board in the near future, and that we needed to keep that in mind as we were looking at potential candidates. And the pipeline we had included some excellent female candidates, but really they were such a small percentage of that pipeline. And in my gut, I felt instantly that any woman, or anyone for that matter, wants to be asked to be on a board for her talent and expertise and values, and not because of gender. And I was able to express this to the group, and the whole team really felt that we could do a much better job with the pipeline so that it could be robust enough to mirror our diversity objectives. You know, our aspiration was that we could actually be making choices based completely on talent, the talent that we needed to achieve the board's objectives. So we went on to establish a subcommittee of this committee that specifically focused on identifying at that time female candidates and building a very robust pipeline. We needed a subcommittee because the whole effort just needed a lot more time and effort than could be accomplished in the scope of the existing committee. And it took a lot of diligent work and effort. We had to be very creative about reaching out to entirely new channels for candidates. And we were able to engage the entire board in that process, and everyone really was extraordinarily helpful. And we also had to be very creative about just educating our network about the importance of diversity in their own pipelines, because that network pipeline was a big part of our own pipeline. We continue to monitor the progress and to create small subcommittees when there are areas of pipeline that just could be more robust. For example, Duke is about to undertake a major initiative in science and technology, and we had no scientists on the board. So it took some time. We went deep into our scientific channels and said, you know, if you could have a scientist or two on the board, like who are your dream choices? And we identified 10 candidates. We narrowed it down to 5. We wound up being so fortunate to have an excellent candidate. And as soon as he came onto our board, he won the Nobel Prize. So it was a really great, and he's been an amazing, he's a relatively new trustee, but just brings an unbelievable level of expertise and really new and fresh eyes to not just our scientific ambitions, but to all of our work. And you know, I will stop there, but I will just say that speaking up about what I was seeing in the selection process really was helpful, I think, in building a longer term process of guaranteeing that we would have a process in place for diversity and for engaging board members in helping us build that diversity over time. So thanks, Marie.
Great, thank you. So before we turn to questions, and feel free to start putting them in, I saw that one's come through already. I want to ask you both, there are elements of what you shared where it's really important to have an understanding of all of the voices in the room. Neil, I imagine there were moments in that process where not everybody was in agreement. And Lorraine, you mentioned sort of having the courage to share your experience, which might have been counter. So how do you encourage others in the boardroom to have their voices heard?
Lorraine, you might handle that one first? Sure.
You know, it's interesting. I remember when my daughter was playing high school soccer, what I observed was that it was the informal times that the team spent together, that or the time that she spent one-on-one with her teammates, that created bonds of trust that allowed them to really get through tough situations together. And you know, I will say, you know, Neil went out of his way to meet one-on-one with me, but I'm sure he did that with all directors. And so when those bonds are created, and when you feel as a director that you've been seen for who you are, and that you've been able to just have informal conversations, whether over dinner or over coffee, I think it just creates an atmosphere that allows you to bring your own self to the table. And I think that, you know, we do all of our boards, I'm sure, go out of their way to build a set of diverse talent at the table. And I think it's such a lost opportunity if that talent, for whatever reason, doesn't feel that they're able to just express what they are seeing, because hopefully we've brought on people that are seeing different things. So I'll stop there.
Actually, Lorraine was the only person that I spoke to during the process. No, I'm joking. I did endeavor to speak to every single one of the board members, not only during the process, but I think what was most important is that had gone and sat with coffee with every single member of the board, early on in my tenure, and that was critical. Not just because, as Lorraine said, it creates buy-in, people feel safe and willing to get out there and talk. It's also so that we as leadership of these boards and organizations know where the talents lie and know the experiences. When you sit down to coffee, you talk about, hey, what have you experienced at Duke? And you hear the story that Lorraine just taught, and I could pick out any number one of the people on these calls and have a little bit of history with them and know if you have a real estate question, you do this. If you have a leadership transition question, you go to that one, and so on. So I was going to say the same thing, just pre-building those relationships to build communication and to leverage those strengths was absolutely critical.
Great, thank you. And I think that certainly we are thinking at CJP, and I'm sure many of you are as well, about how do you do that work in this moment when we're virtual? And I think it remains in some ways, I would say, as important, even more important, than it was when we had the opportunity for those informal connections face-to-face to do that outreach. So there's a question that came through the chat, Neil and Lorraine, about how, in your experience, have you balanced the mixing of using board committees for pipeline and development and bringing in excellent outside talent versus having your board members serve on those committees? How do you think about balancing that?
Hey, Lorraine, can I take a first shot at that?
Sure, please do.
So I think it depends, Marnie and Lawrence. Some committees are better served by probably just being insiders. Think of something like a Gov and Nom, where you really want to understand, how the board and so on has structured over time. It's hard to make good judgments on that if you're not in that room. Something like the search committee, it was critical to us that you had inside and outside voices. You just didn't want the echo chamber of people who had been in the boardroom at the same time. And you could kind of go through the other committees and probably make similar assumptions. So my personal view is that it depends. Sometimes it's better to have outsiders, sometimes not. But it's always great to have outsiders because then you experience them and you might end up bringing them into the organization later. That's my personal view, Lorraine. I don't know if you feel differently.
Yeah, I would agree, Neil. I think there are certain committees where there's the fiduciary governance role of the committee really demands that the committee be integrally involved in conversations that the board is having. That said, I think there are lots of abilities to bring in outside talent when that talent is needed and can be matched with what I would call an authentic objective to be achieved. And because you want the experience for everyone on the committee to be a good one, and you also want the result to benefit the senior management and the head of, really to advance the objectives of the organization. So it's a little bit of an art, and I think it's different for each organization. But I think it's good to really be careful about governance, in the sense that if there are very important decisions to be made, for those decisions to be made by people who are not privileged to be, or are not privileged to certain information, it just can get in the way.
Marty, should we take a shot on the board size question as well?
Great. Yes, and I would love your thoughts on.
Okay, you're breaking up a little there, but just maybe Lorraine and I could give a thought on board size.
Weigh in on that.
Okay, my own view on board size is that smaller is always better, of course. It's just easier to manage and more efficient. But there are tactical reasons why boards sometimes need to be bigger, whether that's getting more expertise in the room, getting buy-in and support from donors, what other tactical reasons. So, we have a 40-person board at CJP. That's a lot of people. It happens to be quite functional. Smaller is better, but sometimes there are reasons to be larger. Lorraine?
Yes. What I would say is that the larger the board, the more formal the management of the board members and board committees should be, so that there are lots of really great things that are accomplished, like rotation, like building leaders, like it's just much more difficult with the larger board to do those kinds of things informally. Whereas with a small board, you have 10 people sitting around a table. Everyone is, pretty much seeing each other all the time, and you have a good sense of what talents and skills are at the table, and conversation is just kind of open. With larger boards, I think it's important to be really, really thoughtful about putting processes in place that guarantee that you are building leadership, that you've got rotation among committees, and that you can sort of build the same sense that you would have of a smaller boardroom. Are there other questions? Let's see.
I think Marnie's video has cut out, but why don't we do one last question? It looks like Jody is asking about demystifying engaging people on the board.
Do you want me to start with that, Neil?
Sure, Lorraine, thanks.
Yeah. So I think that, first of all, it's really important that everyone in your constituency really understands your mission. And you can't assume that just because they participate either as a member or as a parent, or that they really understand what your strategic objectives are, what your reason for being is. And in this world that's really crowded with lots of information coming at you, I think being very direct about that and very intentional about always having people in your network know what your goals and objectives are, and who you hope to be as an organization. I think that's the very, very first step. And then after that, I think it's about relationships. I think as you build a board, for that board to not sit on its own, but to have relationships with constituents is really important, because those informal conversations, I think, sort of help demystify what the board is all about. I also think it's a good idea to do a summary of board minutes and put those out to your constituency so they can see the kinds of decisions that come before a board. Those are just a couple of things I'll mention, and Neil, I'll let you pitch in.
Yeah, I think that's all right. The critical aspect of knowing the talents you have on the board, obviously I see Phil Rosenblatt is on this call. He's given us great wisdom as sort of counsel, legal counsel to the board of CJP. Of course we need to be a governance board overall, and but there are times when certain members need to help with operations. In smaller organizations, there might be more of a call to have board members pitch in. And it's critical to do that, to know where those talents lie, who could help operationalize, particular things, and that's based on the relationships. So, the approach that I've personally seen is boards should, lead with being governance boards, and then, figure out who could help and lean in operational particular situations as needed. Great question.
Thank you both. So we're actually going to move into the breakout groups in a minute. Neil and Lorraine, thank you for sharing all of these incredible insights, and I'm sure we will continue hearing from you and the other panelists in the breakouts. Just wanted to let you know, as we're moving into the breakouts, we did move a few of you from your first choice just to make sure that we have a good balance, but we will be going into those shortly. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming back together. I hope you all had a great experience in your breakout sessions. I know I just was so inspired by the breakout session I was in with Lorraine and Steve and Anne and Amy, and I know I heard the other one was fabulous as well. I'm going to ask if we could do a popcorn, a fast version of sharing any key takeaways. I'm going to start. One of our colleagues, Laura Mandel from J-Arts, who had to jump off, wanted me to share that one of her takeaways from today's session was that while the sessions were happening, she was chatting with some colleagues and learning from her colleagues that she hadn't learned from before. So that was an awesome takeaway. I'm happy she shared that. I'm happy that that happened. Thank you. You guys are really great. You started sharing in the chat right now. What are your key takeaways? Hannah, are we also able to unmute people? Because it would be really fun to be able to share verbally also.
Yeah, anyone can unmute themselves. And if you're having a problem with that, just let me know.
Okay, please feel free. This is interactive. So one of your favorite aspects of LEAP today, please share.
So I'll share two. Lots of one-on-one conversations being really super important, which I always kind of thought, but to hear it from these wise panelists was very helpful, and also what would be surprising to hear about from someone off the board or in the Boston Globe as being a good guideline as to what to share.
Great. Who else wants to share takeaways?
I can add that we do ask our board their opinion often, but I can't recall, and I'm only there as a chair a few years, but a board survey is something I'd like to introduce to really hone in on how people are being engaged and that we're leveraging their talents, both the board and what we like to think of as our advisory. We don't have a formal advisory council, but we do have people we advise with that support our board, which we're so grateful for. So that survey sounds key.
Thanks for sharing, Jody. Who else wants to share verbally? Wendy.
Well, I'll just
Thanks, Kimberly.
Sorry.
Thank you. So this was wonderful, and what a great opportunity to be together with both lay leaders and professional leadership. So thanks to CJP for convening this. I think the important takeaway for me is we put so much pressure on this one session of a new board member orientation, and the idea that new board member orientation is really ongoing. And I think that's something really important for us to remember, that it is more than just that opportunity in the fall to give the binder, physically or virtually, and share those important documents, but to really think about the whole year of someone's experience on the board.
Thank you, Wendy. Myron, did you want to share?
Hi, I wanted to just say that it's really important to set up a pipeline for the board. I think that in many, especially smaller organizations, there really isn't the ability to bring people on in a timely fashion with the right skills and the right intention. So I think that's really a key point that I know I've seen in some of the smaller boards I've been on, that this is an important piece.
Wonderful. Tamar.
Yes, I just wanted to add that, as a new CEO starting literally this month and onboarding new board members, one thing that I've been doing, how do you get to know your board members? Even though I did serve on my board for a year, I was being onboarded as a new board member, and now I'm being onboarded as a new CEO. Doing the one-on-ones with the board members, I've been setting up one-on-one half-hour to 45-minute Zoom with board members and giving myself a full hour in case it goes longer. That's been an amazing, amazing experience. And I think even if I wasn't new, I would be making that effort right now because we're missing out that one-on-one time, and trust needs to be continued to be fostered, not just fostered at the beginning of the relationship. So that's been a wonderful part of it for me despite COVID.
Thank you for sharing, Tamar. Mazel tov. We're grateful for your leadership. Thank you. Anyone else like to share?
So Kimberly, this is Sheriff. I could just add, and I put this in the chat. is that in so many ways, this webinar, kind of the medium is the message. And it really shows us, we hit on this in our breakout, the benefits of technology and how we can do things that we couldn't do before. And I think it applies to the board as well. I mean, we could have such an illustrious panel and bringing everyone together, which would have been really hard to do if we tried to do it physically. And then the use of breakout rooms and polls. And there's just a whole new set of tools that I actually think can make board meetings equally, if not even more effective in the age of Zoom. Of course, we all miss seeing each other, but that doesn't mean that the effectiveness of our board meetings has to go down. I think it actually can improve.
Thank you for sharing that, Shara. And Lorraine made a similar observation that even in the day of Zoom, there actually is an intimacy we can achieve by looking at each other's faces and experiencing what we can of each other now. So thank you. I am going to end on that note. I am enormously grateful for all of your leadership, your wisdom, your sharing, and your vulnerability. Thank you for being with us today, and thank you for leading us.